Is the collective noun for a group of small SUVs a pandemic of small SUVs? Because now it seems like the whole world is overrun with the bloody things.
Subaru have been making boxer engines for decades, and it seems as though they still can't get it right.
We could only really find a couple of minor complaints and really only one major issue. Okay, these things tick so many boxes. It's pretty much the perfect size and it looks great. They're relatively practical. They're loaded with tech and features. They're one of the few SUVs in this segment that have actual off-road ability. And being a Subaru, well, you'd like to think that the build quality is great and reliability shouldn't be an issue. Plus, on the used market, they seem to offer excellent value for money. So you'd like to think that a really good used XV, or Crosstrek if you're watching this from North America, is just a no-brainer, right? Well, maybe that's not the case. These can be guilty of a few issues. Starting with the exterior, plenty of owners have complained about the lack of resilience with the paint. The paint can chip and mark really easily, and even on cars that are washed and polished regularly, even those are starting to show premature wear. Now, this is super disappointing on what is basically the jacked up off-road version of an Impreza hatch, because with all this plastic cladding, you'd assume that the exterior can take some punishment, but apparently the paint can't. Now look, the hot tip from owners here is just get the entire car PPF'd, and hopefully that'll mitigate any of the paint damage issues. Actually, speaking of all the plastic cladding, owners have reported that on cars that live their entire lives outside, basically not in a garage, and haven't been washed and maintained correctly, the plastic can sort of fade to a light grey over time. But look, this isn't worth stressing over because it's so easy to bring this stuff back to its best. There's plenty of quality car care products out there that'll rejuvenate it in no time. Now, speaking of issues with the plastics, some owners have reported that this sort of cowling at the base of the windscreen can lift. Now, you can clip it back into place, but apparently if some people have had their windscreen replaced and the windscreen place hasn't done this properly, these clips can break and this thing just doesn't go back down. Also, there's a little sort of rubber leading edge along here that can come off. Again, pretty easy to fix, but if you don't fix it, water can find its way inside and that might eventually lead to some electronic issues. Although again, it's not what we would call a common issue as such, mainly in hot climates, and it's only a handful of cars really. Also, while we're in this area, if you're looking at one of the higher spec models, like one of these with the automatic wipers, just throw some water at the windscreen and make sure that the auto wipers actually work. Chances are they will, but also while you're here, just check the condition of the wiper blades, no matter what car you're looking at. Look, if they shudder and just don't wipe well at all, a hot tip here, don't fall for the trap of paying way too much for OEM wiper blades, and also just be careful of aftermarket ones because some of those are shit. Look, instead just do what we do and get yourself a set of Wipertech wiper blades. They're so easy to order online, they're a breeze to fit, and they wipe so incredibly well. Plus, when you get yourself a set via the link below, you're going to get 15% off and free express shipping. Do it, they're bloody awesome. Although, if you're planning on doing what Chi has done with his XV and lend it to us to feature, don't do any of that stuff because we're just going to give you a set for free as a thank you present. To volunteer your car, email me via the link below or just shoot us a message on the socials. But back to common issues with the exterior of these, and you know what? That's pretty much it. The exterior of the XV is pretty much trouble-free. Okay, look, in saying that, there are a handful of reports of weird gremlins like the door handles not operating right or the locking mechanisms playing up, but nowhere near as prevalent as you'll find in a host of other cars in this category, some of which will ask thousands and thousands of dollars more than these. Actually, what are these asking on the used market here in Australia at the moment? The really early base models, loads of K, is interesting condition, around about $10,000. At the other end of the spectrum, mint condition, more recent higher spec models, around about $40,000. But I tell you what, this puts it right in the middle of some serious competition in this category. You've got the Hyundai Kona, the Kia Seltos, the Nissan Qashqai, the Honda HR-V, Mazda CX-3 or maybe CX-5, MG ZS, Toyota CHR, Ford Puma. The list just goes on and on and on. I mean, seriously, is the collective noun for a group of small SUVs a pandemic of small SUVs? Because it all started, humbly with the original RAV4, and now it seems like the whole world is overrun with the bloody things. Anyway, look, before you go forking out your $10,000 to $40,000, it is also really important to get your head around the entire XV range. Okay, so the second generation XV ranges from 2017 to 2022, but there was a mid-cycle update in 2020. And look, that included the usual subtle facelift, and the tech and equipment was also upgraded. But the big news for 2020, aside from the spicy cough that was getting around to everybody, was that Subaru also introduced a hybrid powertrain alongside the 2-litre naturally aspirated 4-cylinder. And annoyingly, or at least for us, the US market also had a punchier 2.5 litre join their ranks in 2020. Hey, Subaru Australia, why didn't you give us that engine? That thing would have been awesome. Then you'll need to work out which of the trim specs suits your lifestyle and budget. Here, the non-hybrid has been available across 4 levels and the hybrid over 3. Now we'll get into what each different trim spec includes once we get inside, but one thing that is super consistent no matter what trim spec of XV it's just how bloody good they all look. Now, for full transparency here, I love the way these things look so much that I actually bought a first-gen XV. It's actually the car we used in our first ever ReDriven video. If you're in the market and you're tossing up between a first and second gen, please feel free to go and watch that video. However, there's about a million things I wish we could change. Hopefully this video is going to be far more comprehensive. But look, back to the design and aesthetics of these things. Is it just me, or does it seem that the designers nailed the looks of the XV so much that they almost had to reverse engineer the design to make the Impreza hatch? Because for me, these are so much more attractive than the hatch that it's based on. Or maybe the hatch is based on this, who knows? Also, you can tell the designers absolutely got the design correct from the start, because between the pre and post update, very little change visually. Like the headlights became a little bit smoother and it received a few more embellishments on the front bar, but honestly, you'd have to be a bloody Subaru anorak to tell the difference. Also, hot tip on these, fit a set of sexy aftermarket wheels, maybe some all-terrains, maybe jack it up just a little bit in ride height, and they can look as good as this. I mean, look at how good that looks, I'm just saying. Now inside, what issues do you need to be on the lookout for? Not much, really. Look, there are a few little complaints regarding rattles coming from the A-pillars and from behind the dashboard, but not what we'd call common. And like any car with gloss black plastics, this can kind of scratch pretty easily and look pretty much filthy after a few seconds, but that's the same as any car with gloss black plastic. In really, really hot climates, and depending on what sort of sunscreen you use, there are some reports that the leather on the armrest can wrinkle and get a bit loose. Now, some dealerships in the US are actually replacing these armrests with a material that is far more resilient, but again, it's not what we would call a really common issue. Also, the steering wheel, apparently these can possibly peel, again, if they're in really hot climates or if they haven't been looked after or treated, or depending on what hand cream you use. But again, not common. Actually, on the whole, issues not being common in here. Look, I know we are raising loads of the common issues in this video, but you've got to understand, through the research we've done, the majority of owners we spoke to and read through on owners groups and forums have never ever had a problem with their XV. In fact, so many owners of these things have just gone on to buy another XV, like they've bought a second one for the family or they've traded their initial one in for another XV. Subaru and the XV in general has some of the best customer retention rates of any car in the industry. However, there is one problem in here that loads of owners have had issues with. It's these bloody infotainment systems. Let's start with the good news first. It's awesome that it has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Even on the smaller screen in the lower spec models, obviously it has Bluetooth. There was an update to the interface in 2019 that should make it a little bit better, but even when it's at its best, it's never really one of the best. It's okay to use. Not bad, just okay. But now the bad news. There are countless reports of issues with these things. We're talking Android Auto, Apple CarPlay and Bluetooth just dropping out. Sometimes the volume of whatever you're listening to can just drop by half. Sometimes the screens are just completely unresponsive, or it turns off, or the entire system just reboots randomly. There are even reports that the screen itself can crack if the temperature gets too hot. Now, plenty of these infotainment systems have been replaced under warranty, but then the problem with that is plenty of owners we spoke to have reported that all of these issues just come back again, even on the warranty replaced systems. But if the car is out of warranty, guess how much one owner here in Australia was quoted for a new infotainment system from Subaru? $5,000. $5,000. It's not BMW's iDrive completely integrated into the entire car's operation. That is just a rip-off. And then even the sound quality from the speakers, plenty of owners have complained that they've been pretty underwhelmed with the sound quality. But look, I've got some good news for you. All of this stuff can be remedied because there are so many options in terms of aftermarket systems, especially when it comes to your infotainment system. With an aftermarket system, it means you can get wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It means the screens will be the latest tech possible. The actual interfaces are super solid and wonderful to use. Even the fascia, you can get systems now that have a fascia, so the whole thing looks completely factory fresh. But best of all, chances are the aftermarket systems are going to cost you a damn sight less than what Subaru are going to try to charge you. Now look, our hot tip here when it comes to replacing any of this stuff is to check out our mates at Automotive Superstore. Actually, not just when it comes to infotainment stuff. If you're looking at suspension, off-roading accessories, driving lights, dash cams, car care products, performance parts, engine parts, no matter what you need, Automotive Superstore will probably have it because they carry over 400,000 products from over 500 suppliers. And best of all, to work out exactly what parts are going to suit your car best, you can just use their Retro Finder on the website. It's bloody genius. And everything comes with a fitment guarantee. Check them out, the link's below. But look, what is this interior like to live with? Honestly, bloody good. These seats and the ergonomics, spot on. I love the fact that it feels like the halfway point between driving a car and an SUV, which is kind of what it is actually. But even on a long journey, you're never going to get a numb bum. There's plenty of adjustability. Also, design-wise and just the materials used in here, this doesn't feel like the next generation after the first gen XV. This feels 2 or 3 generations ahead of that. Like everything you touch feels really, really nice. Also, this is going to upset some Subaru fans, but this feels really solid. Like it doesn't, some of the other Subarus we've featured of late, it just feels a little bit cheap and nasty inside. This doesn't. I know this is a top spec model, but it feels pretty premium in here. I mean, even the fake carbon fiber, I'm not too offended by that. Even the way just the things you use feel to your hand, like the indicator stalks and all the buttons, the copious amount of buttons on the steering wheel, there's a bit of a weight to them. Like the tactility is quite nice. Turn the music down, I'm so sorry. But yeah, the way everything feels, it just feels good. Also, there's just little design highlights I love. Okay, it is annoying that this gloss black plastic is in a sort of high traffic area, so that will scratch, as I said before. But then this whole section here, it's like this hard wearing textured plastic, so it feels tough. That's not going to wear too badly. Owners actually mentioned how good these are for interior resilience. Your kids can abuse the crap out of them, but they still feel pretty good. And even when it comes to practicality, pretty bloody good. Good size glove box there. Stop it. Spot for your phone just here with your charging ports and the auxiliary input. 2 cup holders here with little flippy flappy bits to keep your small pretentious coffee in there, like a ristretto today, maybe double ristretto, feeling a bit spicy. This spot I think was supposed to be for your phone, but Subaru forgot that no one really uses an iPhone 5 anymore. Center console storage, excellent, really deep in there. Door bins, okay size, but what I like is that they're sort of far away from your leg and the seat, so it's really, really easy to get to. This section here, that is going to collect life's filth, but because it's so big, it's really easy to clean. No sunglasses holder in this one, no little storage bin there, nothing under the seats. I think it's okay for practicality up front. And then as far as what stuff you're going to get, good news here. Even the early base models were loaded with kit, but here's the hot tip. Try to find one of these. This is a 2.0 IS and it is loaded with gear. The reason for that is because the used market sort of compresses the prices between the higher spec and the lower spec models. It might only cost you $1,000 or $2,000 more to get yourself into one of these, but trust us, it's worth it, especially when it comes to safety gear. Now, if you've ever been to the snow, you will have noticed just how popular these cars are in alpine regions. And while we're speaking of alpine regions, did you know that the 1988 Winter Olympics was actually officially called the XV Winter Olympics? That was the same Olympics that brought light to the Jamaican bobsled team and Eddie the Eagle, obviously both of which went on to inspire the movies Cool Runnings and Eddie the Eagle. And coincidentally, I'm exactly the same height as star of Eddie the Eagle and absolute Australian legend Hugh Jackman. This is in my driving position. We got there eventually, didn't we? This is in my driving position and it's really good. Loads of knee room, good amount of foot room. The seats are maybe a little too vertical, but they're comfortable enough. Good size window because this one's got a sunroof. It actually feels quite airy and spacious in here. This is a massive improvement over my old Generation 1 XV in terms of rear accommodation. Even just the materials used, like the leathers in here, actually feel really nice. Yes, there's some scratchy plastics like the front in certain areas, but I don't think it's a bad thing in an XV. It should be quite resilient. Even if you sit in the middle, the transmission tunnel isn't too huge, so it's not too uncomfortable there. Again, really nice place to be. However, there's not a whole lot for features and practicality back here. Remember, this is the top of the range model and there's no air vents, there's no power outlets here. You've got Uno pocket and behind the seat there. You do have door bins and you can actually get to them if you've got legs, unlike so many other cars. This pocket, again, that's going to collect all sorts of bits of Lego and old food from your kids. You do have a pull down armrest here with a couple of cup holders, but already the leather is getting a little bit wrinkly there, and the cup holders are so shallow, any drink's just going to fall out of it if you do any enthusiastic driving. So yeah, not great for practicality and features. And then in the boot, look, this size and even the opening aperture is substantially larger than the first generation XV, but this is still one of the smallest boots in its class. In fact, this boot is smaller than some hatchbacks, even the size under in this class. However, with the seats down, I know for a fact that you can fit a full-size 5-piece Gretsch drum kit and a PreSonus mixing console in the back of here. That's just muso speak for, yeah, it's got a good amount of space. Now, we do need your help with something. It turns out that of everybody that watches our videos, about 75% don't subscribe to ReDriven, and we would love to bring that number down, because the more of you that subscribe, the more content we can make for you. So hitting that subscribe button actually helps you. Plus, if you'd like even more ReDriven perks and want to support us more, why not join our membership program? The link for that is below as well. But if you are watching this video purely for the XV, make sure you hit the link below and get the free XV cheat sheet at redriven.com. Honestly, it is a must read if you're buying one of these. We've listed out all the common problems and all the information you're ever going to need to know. Now, when it comes to the driving experience and things that are not so good about it, we can only really find a couple of minor complaints and really only one major issue. And that issue is that these cars are starting to get a few years old now, and the batteries can degrade, but the problem with that is it can have a negative impact on your auto stop start. Like, you come up to a set of lights, take your foot off the brake for the car to restart again, and it just doesn't restart, it kind of delays. Even this car has been guilty for it. Good news though, to fix this, just fit a new battery and it should sort it out. And then there are the minor complaints. Some people out there claim that these things really lack power. I don't know about that. I think it's more to do with the lack of torque. See, I found the same thing with my Gen 1 XV. This is a bit the same. If you're pulling into fast moving traffic or trying to overtake, you've really got to rev it out to get anywhere. And it also requires a certain, let's say, level of bravery. Look, don't get me wrong, this thing clearly has more poke than the first gen XV, and even the entire driveline just feels more refined. Bloody hell, it would be so nice if it just had a bit more power and torque. Now, the hybrid powertrain apparently can help this. It has a little bit more low down get-go, but just be warned, if you're buying a hybrid purely for the fuel savings, you might not be actually saving that much money. When you look at some of the tests of these versus the hybrid versus just the non-hybrids, the actual fuel savings are marginal at best. And then the second complaint has to do with these CVTs. And like, yeah, it's not the most inspiring gearbox or transmission out there. It does the job around town. It's easy enough to use, but it has this sort of elastic feel to it, and it feels like what your right foot does versus what the engine does or how it responds, it's a bit too elastic, like they're never really aligned. Look, I'm sure you get used to the transmission over the time, and it's certainly not dangerous at all, but overall, it's just not the most inspiring mechanical package. Also, the suspension, massive improvement over the first gen XV. I think as well, because the car's aging a little bit and it's got, what, you know, nearly 35,000 Ks on the clock, it's sort of softened into itself. It just feels really nice and compliant. But just a quick warning, if you're thinking about buying an XV because you're thinking with the raised ride height, you're going to get this really cushy and comfortable ride quality, that's not necessarily the case. It still does ride quite firm. The reason for that is that basically this is an Impreza hatchback just lifted up. So with the higher center of gravity, you've got to fit firmer suspension to stop the thing from pitching and rolling through corners and under braking and all that kind of stuff. And with that means a slightly firmer ride. It's not like race car firm at all, but maybe it's not as cushy as you might be expecting. But then in terms of positives, this is such a bloody lovely car to drive. It's interesting. It feels noticeably more refined than some of the other Subaru models that we've featured of late. But then at the same time, it still retains that bolted to the ground, secure Subaru feeling. Subarus have this kind of signature feel about them, and this one has it in spades. Also, like, maybe it's the symmetrical all-wheel drive system, but even though it's a smallish car, it gives you a confidence on the road. It just, again, feels secure, feels a little bit indestructible. Also, as I alluded to at the start, this is one of the only SUVs in this category that has genuine off-roading chops. Look, I'm not saying it's going to compete with a Jeep Wrangler in terms of rock crawling, but with the X mode function, you'd be amazed at the sort of shapes these things can pull off-road. However, there is another potential concern with the driving experience here. It's that these CVTs, they don't have a great reputation for reliability. Even Subaru engines in general, apparently they're not as reliable as they once were. What's the story with the mechanical and oily bits? Well, I can't elaborate on that because I'm not a qualified mechanic, but Jim is.
The older EJ series, especially the EJ25, the naturally aspirated engines, they were plagued with head gasket issues. Thankfully, the F-series engines in these cars, they don't have head gasket issues, but they still have issues. The worst issue with the F-series engines is oil leaks. The worst offender here is the cam carriers. Look, Subaru have designed this engine so there's the cylinder head, then there's a cam carrier, and then there's a valve cover, and the design has introduced a whole extra area that can potentially leak, and it's only sealed with RTV sealant. And they do leak. It's a very common problem. I should say some don't leak at all, and some just leak a little bit, but some of them absolutely piss out. And the other problem here with oil leaks is the timing cover. Now that they've gone away from timing belts and they have a timing chain, there's a huge timing cover, and there's 34 bolts around the perimeter of it, and it's the same RTV sealant, and yeah, they leak. Now, the problem here with fixing it, it's very labor intensive. The parts are not expensive. It's just a few seals and some sealant. But to do it, you have to take the engine out, which takes a lot of time. And that can cost you 3 or 4 grand. So yeah, a lot of money. As I said, look, a lot of them don't leak, but as time goes on and more miles on the car and more heat cycles, it does increase the likelihood of a leak because that sealant really doesn't last forever. Something you can do to help stem the flow of oil leaks is just make sure that the PCV valve, that's the positive crankcase ventilation, make sure that valve is working properly, because if it isn't, you can get too much crankcase pressure and that will make the leaks even worse. Thankfully, a PCV valve on one of these, you can have it changed by your mechanic for probably around about $100, so money well spent. Now in Australia, only about 5% of these were the hybrids, so getting accurate reliability data, it's not very easy. What I can say though, the hybrid system, it's a very small battery. It adds about 200 kilograms to the weight of the car, makes virtually no difference to the fuel economy, so you really wonder why you would bother. Some owners complain about the batteries not meeting their expectations, and that is worse in a hot climate like Australia. Other owners complaining about endless check hybrid system fault codes and warnings on the dash, and only to be told at the dealership that there's actually nothing wrong with it. Yeah, and as you can imagine, that is very frustrating and disappointing. Subaru in this generation have improved the valve bodies, and they've also improved the drive belt durability. So the likelihood of this generation having a catastrophic failure is actually fairly low. It's not zero though. But for the few that have failed, Subaru are still covering that under warranty. But that warranty won't last forever. Some owners complain about shuddering at slow speeds and slow gear engagement. That gear engagement problem is worse in cold climates. It's not really a fault, it's just how it is. Now, servicing these, if anyone tells you that the CVT is a filled for life transmission and you don't have to change the fluid, that is incorrect. It's recommended that the CVT fluid get changed at 90,000 kilometers. I would recommend, if you're going to keep the car long term, do that every 45. It's not cheap, but it could save you a lot of money down the road. And the other pro tip here is don't tow anything with them, even a small caravan. Yeah, basically the CVT just can't handle it.
But the big question still remains, should you buy one of these? Well, yes, no, wait, maybe. Only if it ticks some really critical boxes. What we mean is, only consider an example that has a full and thorough service history, ideally with a CVT that has been serviced well ahead of schedule. Make sure it passes a full pre-purchase inspection with flying colours, and look, if it nails these points, most signs suggest it's going to be a great little car for you. Also, you might want to, let's say, mentally and financially prepare for any mechanical headaches down the track. Although in saying that, you'd like to think that any of these that have been meticulously maintained will avoid those problems. Hopefully. But look, overall, the right used XV should be a bloody good thing. In saying that though, so can this. But we have a favour to ask. If you already own an XV, can you please let us know in the comments what your ownership experience has been like? Because that way anyone researching this has even more information to draw from. The Subaru designers absolutely... You can fit a full-size 5-piece